It became official earlier today. Reports emerged all throughout Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, message boards. Reported first by TexAgs.com. Jimbo Fisher officially fired. This was his 6th season in College Station. The timing is interesting, of course, because they just hung 51 points on Mississippi State. However, I don't think this comes as a great shock to any of us who follow college football to hear that Jimbo Fisher was going to be relieved of command. Some of the details on Jimbo Fisher: 45 and 25 in his time with A&M. He just signed a new 10-year extension with $95 million in guaranteed money back in 2021. You may recall that was an extension that stemmed, at least in part, from the possibility that he might leave for LSU. For that money, in case you're wondering, what did A&M get? They got exactly 0 SEC West titles and 0 playoff appearances.
Knocked on the door in 2020, right? In an arguably more difficult year because it was 10 SEC matchups in 2020, the COVID year.
Yep.
Right there, finished 5th or I think 5th. But yeah, no playoff berths, no SEC West championships, as you mentioned. And ultimately disappointing with regard to expectations in College Station, given the investment, given the move to the SEC, given the initial burst of excitement of the Kevin Sumlin, Johnny Football era. Followed by Jimbo Fisher as a national championship coach, brought in to bring them to that next level.
A&M intends to honor the full value of the contract, which
What's the number?
He's going to be paid $76 million to not coach at A&M any longer. To quote the great Cosmo Kramer, that's a lot of potatoes. Dan Rubenstein, it is a record buyout figure. The highest that we know of was Gus Malzahn's back after he was relieved of command in 2020 when Auburn paid him about $21.5 million to go away. By the time all is said and done, this is going to end up being north of $100 million when you buy out assistants, when you got to handle NIL deals, try and keep your players on the team, all of that sort of thing. It's going to be a very costly transaction for Texas A&M. Elijah Robinson is going to serve as the interim coach the rest of the way. So those are, I guess, the important bits of context that you need to know. We're going to talk a little bit more about why he was fired, how attractive the A&M job is to whoever they would go out and target next, who they might target next, and then just, I think, projecting forward what reasonable expectations might be for that person. Because we had some questions come in via Twitter, like, are fans realistic about A&M being a contender and that sort of thing. So why don't we start at the very top?
Yes.
Why'd Jimbo get fired, Dan?
Because expectations were beyond what he was able to deliver. And you can certainly have a conversation. We can certainly have a conversation about whether those expectations are reasonable. But he was brought in as, capital N national championship head coach. And it was a time where they spent on assistants. They spent investing in the recruiting machine, especially given where that class was a couple of years ago. And the promise of Jimbo Fisher as that top-tier A-list coach coming in and bringing them over the top. And I don't know what the final record was compared to where Kevin Sumlin was, but that was like an ongoing ticker item. Like, well, after this many games, Kevin Sumlin was this and this. And after this many games, Jimbo is a little bit worse than Kevin Sumlin. And so it's quite easy and I think relevant to point to quarterback injuries or quarterbacks being good but not great, because what are you going to measure Jimbo Fisher quarterback against? Well, you're going to measure him against Jameis Winston, because Jameis Winston and that Jimbo Fisher offense from 2013 is one of the probably 3 greatest, if not greatest, offense ever in the modern era, however you want to categorize. Jimbo Fisher didn't deliver. That's what it is. And at times he would deliver a defense. The Mike Elko defense from, I think, 2021 finished 4th nationally in points per drive. Like, incredible defense. Offense was always a problem. Jimbo Fisher's an offensive guy. Couldn't figure it out. Seemed to have hit his ceiling. And there was no clear indication, despite offensive coordinator changes, despite incredible recruiting classes, that Jimbo Fisher was a coach, be it in February, be it in December, be it in August, be it in October, that was going to get them to 10-plus wins a season. There was no clear indication that was coming just around the bend. And A&M figured out that they could find the money to make the situation go away and start over, and that's why he's gone.
Yeah. To your question, Kevin Sumlin had a 51-26 mark in 6 seasons. So Jimbo didn't quite get to that number.
Yep.
I think you hit the nail on the head. This is a guy who the high water mark for his tenure at A&M was finishing 4th in the polls in 2020 in the COVID year. But if you look across the board, A&M since then was 17-8 straight up as a betting favorite. They were 99th in the FBS and 13th among the 14 SEC schools in that category. Only Florida had been worse as a favorite among SEC schools since the start of the 21 season. And he was just not winning the games he was supposed to. He certainly wasn't knocking off the Giants that he was hired to knock off. He wasn't winning the games he was supposed to. He also was seemingly unwilling to be more flexible with his offense. You talk about him being an offensive guru.
Right.
Even after hiring Bobby Petrino, it was a big offseason story. It was a great indication, at least for us, something of a red flag, that whenever they would ask him, what is the breakdown of responsibilities going to look like? What is he going to do differently? Jimbo was always uncomfortable with that question. And so I suspect that coaches who have been around as long as Jimbo, given all the changing dynamics in college football, whether it's with new schemes, whether it's with new infrastructure away from the field and how recruiting has changed, you're going to see a lot of this with guys who just basically are kind of like too old for this crap. And I wonder if Jimbo falls a little bit into that category. Obviously, has accomplished a great deal in his coaching career, but it's been a minute since they won the national championship in 2013. The next then question is, as we look forward, how attractive is this job at A&M? Because there's a duality to it that I think is quite interesting. It's both attractive and also incredibly complex. In many ways, A&M is kind of a perfect metaphor for college football, at least the current state of college football, right?
Sure.
Because you've got equal parts money and chaos. On the attractive side of the coin, money is no object here. Money's no object. If they're willing to pay $100 million to make Jimbo go away, they can obviously afford to break the bank and hire somebody new going into this new playoff era, this expanded playoff era, this expanded SEC era. It is attractive also because of the NIL infrastructure, which is far and away the best in the country. And, initially it drew criticism from other schools that did not have something similar, but A&M has very much been leading the charge, pushing the envelope in the NIL category.
Sure.
And it's a nice asset to have in your back pocket if you're hiring somebody new, to know that you have that at your disposal. It's also attractive because of the physical infrastructure. We talk a lot about facilities. You can only make facilities so good. They just opened the Coolidge Football Performance Center. It's got a 160-yard indoor practice field.
Great.
With air conditioning, which was a big deal. The heat of Texas was not something they wanted to contend with on the practice field. And they're continuing renovations. They're trying to make this thing as good as it can be. More broadly, they're clearly investing in football facilities. And of course, it's attractive because it's in Texas. It's in the SEC. It's got all sorts of built-in advantages. I would add, though, that the complicating factors are also the outside money. Because anytime you've got the outside money coming down, there's a lot of politicking that needs to go on to keep everybody happy. Since 2002, A&M has had 5 presidents, 8 if you want to count the interims. They've also had 3 different athletic directors since joining the SEC back in 2012. Sam Kahn wrote a great piece back in June for The Athletic where he described the atmospherics around Kevin Sumlin's contract extension basically was handed down to the university president. And the edict was, you're just going to do this, okay? And so any type of setup, like we talk about this a lot, any type of setup where you've got a number of power brokers, it doesn't seem like there is a clear hierarchy, those are the situations that often are set up for failure. Totally separate from however much money is going into it, however much they want to win, and whatever that investment looks like. But when there's not that clear reporting structure and a hierarchy that everybody can get behind, that makes it more complicated. It absolutely makes it more complicated. And I would also add, just like kind of, maybe this goes unsaid too often, but they joined the SEC. It's harder in the SEC. Right. It's harder than than where they were in the SEC. They're going to be a Power 4 conference now. I would argue that the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10 all seemingly have easier pathways into the playoff. The SEC now, with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, it's not getting easier. And it certainly didn't get easier for A&M when they decided to join the conference back in 2012. So it's nuanced. It's nuanced here. And I think moving forward, as we start talking about candidates, which is probably where we'll go next with this,
right?
We're going to measure these guys based on whether or not they get to the playoffs. And I think they're all smart enough to recognize that. If you're Dan Lanning, who is a name that we can talk more about, do you want to come to A&M? You've got more money. You get set up with generational wealth. But if you're really going to be measured as a coach by how often you get to the playoff, is that really an easier pathway? I don't know. But
okay, so
this is where this job is at.
Yes, the Texas A&M job is, of course, one of the more fascinating jobs in America because the sub-question here is, what are you selling? What are you selling at Texas A&M? You're selling a school that has expectations beyond its modern results or its results ever, really. And so you're saying, okay, we're in the SEC West. Are you able to sell something above or different or differentiated from LSU or Alabama? Not really, right? No coach is going to be able to sell himself like Nick Saban. No school is going to be able to sell itself as the standard bearer in state like LSU, right? That LSU has this incredible wealth of talent in state, and LSU is the only show between those borders. And Texas A&M is not as big as the University of Texas in terms of national branding, right? Everybody knows Austin. Everybody knows the burnt orange. And Texas A&M has had a good amount of success and has a rivalry, and they were pretty good in the Big 12. They've been pretty good in the SEC, but they are not the biggest program in state. And they are in a state that everybody between California and Maine is trying to recruit into, right? And they're not able to, there's so many prospects that it's impossible to keep the best of the best. And they're competing against LSU and Alabama as well for in-state kids because, Texas and Texas A&M can only take so many. And so you're not selling championship culture, whereas you can sell that at places across the country. Like, look at you be the next, so-and-so Heisman quarterback or whatever. Texas A&M does have a recent Heisman quarterback, I understand. But you understand what I'm saying. Or a playoff trophy or a conference trophy. Texas A&M is not selling that, right? That they have this culture and this standard, this championship standard. And so year over year, coach over coach, it's always going to be, we're finally going to get there. This is how we're going to do it. And they're competing against Nick Saban showing off a fistful of rings. They're competing against LSU and Florida, who've actually won. And so then it's a matter of, okay, who is that coach who can come in and say, this is how we're doing things differently? This is not how I'm doing things, how I did them somewhere else. This is how we're starting at square one and starting over culturally, starting over in terms of what this program is. And so then it's like, who can do that? Who is that coach who can go in and immediately take that kind of pressure, recruit against those types of names? And who knows how long, Brian Kelly's going to be at LSU. Who knows how long Nick Saban's going to be at Alabama? Who knows how long Kirby Smart's going to be against Georgia? But if what that class looked like 2 years ago is indicative of what Texas A&M vaguely expects, the Texas A&M fan base, the Texas A&M administrators, boosters, whoever, if they vaguely expect to have annual top 10 classes, who is that name that can deliver that and deliver that operation, that machine to deliver that consistently? I don't know if it's a money thing. I don't know if it's as attractive of a job as people internally think it will be, but the pool of those dudes, if you think it's Dan Lanning, if you think it's Kalen DeBoer, if you think it's Lane Kiffin, whoever, there's not a lot of guys who can go to a place that has no history of winning on a conference level and say, we expect you to bring these conference championships. We expect you to bring these annual 12-team playoff berths because that's just what we want, right? Even though we have no history of it. And so that's the complicating factor, is Texas A&M is sort of stacked up against it. On the flip side, Ty, and this is just me as a college football fan, and my opinion has evolved over the years, I don't love telling people not to have big expectations, right?
No, not at all.
If you're a Texas A&M fan, you should have high expectations. Like you mentioned at the top, like you invest in it, you recruit like you want to do it. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say, accept the fact that you're an 8.5 win program forever, and that's just the way it's going to be, and you should be happy with those 8 or 9 wins every year. It's really tough in the SEC. We're entering into an era where you can get into a 12-team playoff without winning 11 games, without going undefeated. And we're entering into an era where, I don't know, maybe some of these big-name coaches are going to age out of the SEC and retire, and there's going to be a power vacuum within the conference, and why not Texas A&M, right?
Yeah, man.
Why the Kansas City Royals have won a World Series. Totally different sport, totally different situation, but it's sports. Crazy things happen. I just... in looking at some of these candidates and looking at some of these realities today, I'm positive Texas A&M has an idea of a direction or 2 directions they want to go to, because you don't spend, what was the number, $76 million?
Yeah.
You don't pass the hat around for $76 million, which, by the way, I saw is more than Jameis Winston made as an active NFL quarterback. Jimbo Fisher is going to be paid more than that to not coach. Wild. Play baseball, everybody. That's the lesson. Did Jameis Winston? He was like a baseball prospect too.
Yeah.
The point is, it's appealing because of the money. It's appealing because of location. It's appealing because of the stage. It's appealing because of an expanded postseason. But at the same time, usually there's a reason a place that has money, a great stadium in Kyle Field, right? Like there are so many different boxes checked with Texas A&M beyond the fact that nobody has ever consistently won big there. So that's the thing. It's a lot of the names on this list are at places that have won, that have consistently given guys what they want in terms of facilities and money and assistant pools. And they're at places that make sense for them, which is why they're winning. And the Jimbo thing always was going to feel a little bit off because he was coming off of a really down period at Florida State. Like, the program was not in a good place when he left, which sounded alarm bells for Florida State people who basically by and large said, "Are you sure? Okay, good luck with all that," when Jimbo was hired to Texas A&M. And so I just don't think there's an obvious name here. I don't like, well, I don't know what you think. What do you, I mean, we're going to get into candidates now, but what is your outlook here?
Well, no, and I look, I agree with you completely. There's no reason that you can't have big expectations just because you haven't achieved them previously, right? I mean, that's always been my big thing. If we're going to play in a setup where the playoff is going to be the ultimate goal now, I think, for any of these guys who get hired, you should have high expectations. There's no reason that you shouldn't have high expectations. And just because the history isn't there, I mean, we got some questions on Twitter about that. Like, why is A&M throwing around money like this? It hasn't done anything like this before that I can point to and attract coaches to want to come in and do it again.
Yeah.
I say go for it. Go for it. It's certainly comical that they went for it in this capacity with Jimbo and they came a little bit short, a lot of bit short, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't try it again. I do think that if you throw all the money in the world at the problem and it doesn't fix itself, if you've got a guy in Jimbo Fisher who swaps out offensive coordinators, swaps out schemes, swaps out whatever, the talent remains high. On some level, the coaching or maybe the infrastructure behind the coach is really the problem. Mm-hmm. And so it's just, depending on who we get to be the next guy at A&M, I guess we'll put that to the test. To that point, I have seen a number of names floated around, and these are from Pete Thamel, from Chris Vanini, from Bruce Feldman. Yeah. I can read the list off here. Some early potentials that have been floating around the interwebs. And bear in mind, money is no object here, so it really does open up the playbook. Lane Kiffin, Mike Elko, Mike Norvell, Dan Lanning, Jeff Traylor, Chris Kleiman, Cliff Kingsbury,
sure,
Kalen DeBoer, Jonathan Smith. I've also seen Eli Drinkwitz, Lance Leipold, PJ Fleck, Urban Meyer, of course, Urban Meyer. And let me just add James Franklin to get his name just running through these algorithms here. Bearing in mind what we talked about earlier, the state of this job, and I think the need to be a dogged recruiter to keep the class intact, the need to build something new, essentially, because A&M wants to get to a place that it has not been. Also, the need to be something of a politician in order to feed all the mouths that are seemingly going to help pay for this contract and need to feel important to make sure that you're still on their good side. Of those names, which of those guys do you think are such that they can check all those boxes?
Oh, man.
It's hard, right?
Okay, I'll bring up the list. Kalen DeBoer is a very good coach, but there's no evidence that he can recruit on the level that's expected at Texas A&M and at an SEC power, right?
No, I mean, if you want to talk about guys like DeBoer, I would also put guys like Mike Elko, Chris Kleiman, Lance Leipold, Jeff Traylor in that same camp. And I like all those guys. I think all those guys would excel pretty much anywhere because they're very good coaches. But all of these guys are very understated. They don't have the recruiting track record. And I also don't know how their personality types play at a setup like A&M, where
Mike Elko was there, right? He was there for 4 years.
He was there, but some of the other names on this list, Lane Kiffin is a much bigger personality who maybe garners a little bit more respect from some of the money men. Definitely a flashier candidate.
Yep, SEC head coaching experience. Yep.
I just wonder how an understated guy fits in at a place like Texas A&M. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, Kalen DeBoer has won a ton of games, albeit largely on lower levels, and has Washington playing on an incredible level with a roster that he didn't recruit. That's the reality. So that's the looming question, and Washington's current recruiting class is nothing special, building on last year. Dan Lanning is an incredible recruiter, has seemingly taken Oregon up a step from where Mario Cristobal was. Last year, they don't go to a big bowl game. This year, they seem primed to, and the talent acquisition has been both through the portal and on the recruiting trail incredible, and that's to Eugene, Oregon, where it's more difficult. Now, there are certain appeal points of Eugene and University of Oregon and Nike that Texas A&M won't be able to match, but certainly geography is in Texas A&M's advantage. I don't think he's going. Especially with the Big Ten move, if there is any school, I don't even know what school that is, but I think he can wait out Bama, Georgia, something that's enormous.
He's going to get a ton of love, and I get it.
Yeah.
He coached in the SEC before moving up to Oregon. He's got familiarity with the region.
Yeah.
A beast of a recruiter. Could absolutely find his way into the playoff this season.
Yeah.
Depending on how things shake out. I think the jury's still out on how good of a game day coach he is.
Sure.
But this gets back to what I said before. The path for Dan Lanning to get into the playoffs starting next year is much easier, I think, through the Big Ten than the SEC. They might have the second or third best team next year in the Big Ten.
I agree.
And so if you're Dan Lanning, maybe the money is better if you go to A&M, but is it really worth uprooting everything that you're building at Oregon, knowing that the new measuring stick starts in 24 with a 12-team playoff berth? I don't know if I'd want to leave if I were him, but I'm not him.
And one of the things that we should mention, it's even if it's, Jonathan Smith, Kalen DeBoer, Mike Elko, any of these guys, there can be recruiting machines built around them, right? They can have the vision, but they're not the dogged guys in the way that other guys within the recruiting department and assistant coaches are. Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, these are all very strong coaches who tend to succeed wherever they are. I think, honestly, with how much money they're spending on Jimbo Fisher, and I know money's no object. I think Dan Lanning's buyout's like $20 million. I just think you find the best possible proven football coach, and it's a step up from, Oregon State's future is not in the Power 5 realm. Kansas State's future is not on the SEC's level. So, maybe it's just a better fit, Chris Kleiman at Kansas State than it is at Texas A&M. Duke has its own limitations, but you know what? Maybe Mike Elko is waiting for the best possible fit. And, he knows College Station for better or worse, and maybe he loved it. Maybe he misses it, but he left for Duke. And maybe that says something. I think he's a terrific head coach, and I think he would succeed anywhere he goes. Seems like he has the personality. Seems like he gets teams to overperform, but in that kind of fishbowl on that kind of stage, it's just different. Duke does not expect much. Duke would love annual bowl games, and he's an annual bowl game coach at the very least. I saw Mike Norvell on that list.
I like Mike Norvell. He's from Texas. He's 42.
Keep that operation moving from Florida State to College Station.
Keep the train rolling.
Yeah.
It did take a bit to get things going at Florida State, but he has rebuilt the Noles into, a legit playoff contender, maybe a title contender this year in a very short period of time. He's going to be losing a lot next season, and he's done it on both sides of the coin here. He's built the program up via high school and portal recruiting. He's added talent where it's made sense to do so. He has made that talent better, and I think he has made that culture better. There's a cultural aspect to this, too, because when he started You'll remember in 2020, it was a rocky go there in the very beginning. And he was able to kind of circle the wagons and build that thing moving forward. A lot on the back of Jordan Travis, who's been a huge leader for that program. So I like Norvell. I don't know if there's any great impetus to leave a good situation at Florida State. Again, if we're talking about playoff berths and the pathway in, the path through the ACC is like, if you're Florida State, who are you really contending with to get there? I mean, Clemson could be on the downturn at this point.
Yeah.
So if you're Mike Norvell, that's a great situation, but I think it warrants mentioning that he's from the area. He's still a young coach, and this could be a very interesting situation if they open up the pocketbook for him.
Yeah, I'm curious about. See, I think Florida State is such a huge place. We'll see what happens with the future of the ACC and grant of rights and everything like that. Like, if I were Texas A&M, I just go after the best possible coach. Because if you look at where the Aggies have been this past couple years, it hasn't been a talent acquisition thing. It hasn't been a fan support, home field advantage thing. Like, they haven't been blown out by really good teams. In fact, they just beat LSU last year, right? No. Comfortably. They lose winnable games. They've lost winnable games under Jimbo Fisher, right? Where like Devin Achane has 218 yards and they just stop feeding him in the fourth quarter, right? Whether it's against Ole Miss or, this year it was Ole Miss and it was Alabama. Like, what did we talk about? Like, they didn't, for 35 days, 38 straight days, they didn't score an offensive touchdown in the second half. Like, they're not far away. But the lasting legacy of Jimbo Fisher in College Station is losing winnable games, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And so, if that's the big thing, it's just finding the best possible on-field football coach. Like, as the engineer of the Underthink Express, like, you throw a bunch of money at Lance Leipold and Chris Kleiman, or Kalen DeBoer or Jonathan Smith. Like, the problem, I think what got them into this specific problem, and the AD is obviously no longer there, is they went big fish hunting. And they went for the biggest fish instead of the tastiest fish. And that's how they got Jimbo Fisher. Because it just felt like, oh, look what we landed. Look at the size of this bad boy on the hook. And he lost winnable games consistently. All the time. All the time, Ty.
Yeah, he did.
And so you have to look carefully and do your due diligence. Dig into the tape. Dig into the data. Who won the most winnable games of the appropriate candidates on this list? Who won the losable games, not who lost the winnable games? And Dan Lanning has lost some winnable games, mind you. Yeah. I just think, especially those guys who haven't had a huge payday and are in conferences or in Oregon State's situation, not in a conference, like, I think there's a perfect marriage in one of those types of coaches that I don't think exists with Lanning or Norvell or any of those guys.
I would hire Mike Elko, Chris Kleiman, Lance Leipold. Lance Leipold was the first guy listed.
Jeff Traylor's interesting to me.
I was going to say Lance Leipold's the first guy listed in the column that Bruce put out there.
Yeah.
Jeff Traylor, I think, is a great coach.
Mm-hmm.
He's somebody who builds hierarchy within his programs. He's known as a
has
CEO.
The reputation in state with high school coaches, yeah.
He's got a coaching tree. I mean, he is a very, very good football coach that I think would do well, certainly in the state of Texas. I would hire any of those guys. I just wonder if there is still that inclination to go big game hunting. And that brings me to Lane Kiffin.
Yeah.
Lane Kiffin's been around an eternity in college football. He's still a young guy. He makes a lot of sense. He would know exactly how to use that NIL infrastructure. He would certainly keep the recruiting on par.
Mm-hmm.
Him and Sark duking it out in the state of Texas in
great
the SEC
story.
would be
Great
a great
narrative.
storyline for us to cover. I also wonder, kind of to what you mentioned earlier, if giving somebody like Lane Kiffin more resources is gonna make him a better coach. His offenses are dynamic. I'm waiting for.
Well, he's complained about NIL stuff and losing guys to the portal because of NIL promises and paydays. Yeah.
So I just wonder if that's the most obvious direction. I think he's a good football coach. He has made the Ole Miss program better.
Yeah.
But is he the type of game day coach that is going to win those games you're supposed to win, and on occasion pick off one of the teams he's not supposed to beat?
It'd be kind of a funny fit, though, right? Given all the West Coast California experience and the sort of rigidity it seems like of Texas A&M campus culture. It's a weird fit. It
feels like a weird fit to me.
Yeah,
and I totally expect they're going to go after him.
Yeah.
It just feels like a weird fit to me.
Yeah, and not that Ole Miss has that California lifestyle, but they're just they've been perennial underdogs within the SEC, and like, why not take a shot with Lane Kiffin and having fun? It does seem like a strange fit, though. What's Ross Bjork, though, the AD that I believe hired Lane at Ole Miss, is now the AD at Texas A&M. So there's the connective tissue there, and you understand why Lane Kiffin is brought up with these jobs and has been brought up with most recently the Auburn search. I think there was some back and forth there, and he had to like specifically announce before the Egg Bowl that he wasn't taking that job. I don't know. Seems like a weird fit, but you know what? This is generational wealth for anybody who takes this job, and I wouldn't blame him for taking it. But you really have to break things down, and you have to have the cojones to say, we're not taking a top 10 class for the sake of taking a top 10 class. If it's the right dudes, you know, it's a culture thing. It's who is going to develop and stay here, right? Culture's not about just making everybody happy, but in this era, it's about keeping everybody on campus. And that's a money thing, and that's a desire to stay within a locker room thing. And so you have to find that right guy, because it didn't seem like the culture was in a good place these past couple of years.
That's why I like Norvell. I like Norvell. I think he
started off things pretty rocky at FSU culturally. Yeah.
But he pulled it together. He's been very targeted with the guys he's brought in. Now, the Travis Hunter thing went off the rails. I thought they were going to fire him after that. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, all things considered, I just think he's done a really good job. I don't know if it makes sense. Some of these other names here don't make any sense. Like Cliff Kingsbury, no thank you. Eli Drinkwitz was on the hot seat till like 4 weeks ago. So no thanks. PJ Fleck, somebody put PJ Fleck on a list. Ugh. I don't like that at all.
Right.
I'm just going to say James Franklin's a fine coach. I can put guys in touch if you're interested. solidrebel@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
Let me know. Would A&M hire Urban?
I don't think anybody's hiring Urban. I think that ship has sailed. I think they might make a call.
The longer you think about it, the more you're going to talk yourself into it.
No, I don't think anybody's going to hire him. I think he's done. From everything I've heard, it's just not a situation that once you start doing due diligence, people are going to be like, I think this is not the move. So, I think if you get the best ball coach, Ty. Get the best ball coach. Bring back, you know, the guy who's at Oregon now, who helped to build that class a couple of years ago. I always forget how you pronounce his name, Marshall Malcho or something. Who's done a great job he's like the number 2 guy. He's the second most important person to the Oregon program after Dan Lanning. You know, bring back that guy to run things. I think he's from the South somewhere. So, no, I get one of those dudes. I'm never crazy about the G5 jump unless there's a good amount of Power 5 experience in the resume. So that's why, like, I know Bruce listed the Troy coach and Jeff Traylor from UTSA, and the Troy coach, John Sumrall, I believe.
John Sumrall, yeah.
Has experience at big places, so that's something. But, like, I always appreciate, if you're going to a place that big, a good amount of healthy experience in a large machine. Like, again, Dan Lanning had at Georgia and Alabama before taking the Oregon job. So,
man. Well,
I don't know who. I mean, look, there's big name coordinators, right? Glenn Schumann at Georgia, guys like that who, you know, are doing the Kirby thing of waiting for that right moment to take a big job.
You can't hire Glenn Schumann.
He's real young. He's 33, something like that?
You can't do that.
Why?
They would burn it down if they didn't hire somebody who had after spending like $100 million to basically get rid of Jimbo and all of his roots. You're going to hire Glenn Schumann? No, you're going to hire a coach with a proven track record.
You're hiring a Georgia person, right? You're hiring somebody from the most dominant current program who is deeply interwoven in the Georgia DNA. I mean, that's why these guys get hired.
You'd get them cheaper,
right?
But I don't see that. I just don't. I'm surprised a little bit at the timing, but I suspect that A&M breaking the seal is going to be the harbinger for many other moves to come. At time of recording, there are plenty of Sam Pittman rumors out there.
What about Jed Fish?
Jed Fish?
Any of these guys that are coming from smaller conferences moving forward. He built up something super well, crazy impressive. Defense has taken a nice step forward at a hard place to win. Offense has taken a very impressive step forward, has an eye for quarterbacks, big program experience, UCLA, Michigan, NFL experience.
All right.
That's an interesting name to me.
There are a lot of interesting names, and I think the money is going to make them all interesting.
Yeah.
Anybody who's potentially interested in this job.